Second marriages fail between 60 and 67% of the time. And the reason is because often when you've been married and divorced, you carry what into that second marriage? Unforgiveness of what's happened in the past with somebody else. You carry in bruises, and you might not even be aware of them. I mean, you found somebody you love, you said, I do, but then they do something that presses on that bruise and it hurts, and you respond. Third marriages are somewhere between 70 and 75% of those fail. Why? I mean, what wouldn't you would think, hey, it's third try. We've figured this thing out by now. We know what we did wrong. No, there's just that many more bruises to be pressured or to be poked. There's more places upon your emotional body that you're sensitive. And so it's important for us to realize that bruises are the result of wounds that haven't been healed. You could say hidden wounds. And that's why we live in such an angry world. Statistically, pastors will serve between 8 and 12 congregations within their lifetime. Congregants will go somewhere between 7 and 10 congregations within their lifetime. And every time we move on, right, we're carrying with us something from the past, especially if we move on, whether it be at work or in marriage or in church, because it's the fact that we were hurt in the past. So how do we know if the pain you're feeling, the pain I'm feeling, is the result of a new wound or an old bruise? Let me give you just a few things. You might say the black and the blue of a bruise. You know it's a bruise as opposed to a new wound when there's a disproportionate response. When something happens and you make a mountain out of a molehill. In other words, let's say they're late. You're in a relationship and the person you're in a relationship with is late to dinner and they don't call. That's not good, right? That's a wound. But rather than you and that person having a conversation, you just kind of blow your top. You start to think, we're not going to make it. I don't know if I can stay with you. In other words, the fact that that person was late once and didn't call, which makes it even that much worse, goes over the top, is an indicator that the pain you're feeling isn't the result of the fact they're late. It's the fact that that lateness poked a bruise from the past. In the past, something happened that caused you great pain, and lateness was probably a part of it. Um, if they do something, any of those kind of things, right? Where they do something that's not something maybe they ought to do, right? They come home and they say, I'm got a new job or I'm whatever. And it's like, well, you should have told me or we should have had a conversation, but you overreact. The second clue that it's a bruise as opposed to a new wound is when you continue to repeat the pattern. Different faces, same argument. In other words, you go to Walmart, you go to Target, you go to the dollar store, you go to Walgreens, and you leave mad because you think they all disrespect you. They ignored me. They looked the other way. They didn't give me enough time, right? In other words, you've been to 4 different places, and yet you've had the same emotion or the same feeling. That's a good sign that it wasn't the fact that they ignored you that caused you the pain. It's the fact that they pressured an old bruise. And then let me give you one more, is when you project. It's when you punish this person for what that person did. You know what I'm saying? It's like you're in a relationship and maybe they say, hey, I'm going to go fishing. Or maybe they say, we're going to go to the mall. Or maybe they say, I'm going to go golfing. And the moment they say that, it creates pain in your life. Right? And it's like, now you're angry. What? You're going to go golfing. You're going to go fishing. You're going to go to the mall. You're going to whatever it is. Right? And you over respond. Why? Because in the past relationship, that led to a very destructive place. That doesn't mean it's going to in this relationship, but you're not operating based upon what's happening in front of you. You're happening based on what's happened in the past, and you're projecting what somebody else did in a prior relationship upon your present day relationship. That's the reason we saw these statistics when it comes to marriage, because that happens over and over again. You can look back and see this led to our divorce or our breakup. And now you see an early behavior in the person you're in a relationship with, and you project upon them what happened in the past relationship. I remember early on when I was pastoring, we had this couple that ended up getting divorced because they couldn't fold the clothes right, right? And often something like that again does what? When you fold the clothes like the person who had an affair on you, right? And all of a sudden you're so angry that they didn't, fold them right or hang them up right or whatever. And again, I'm not saying that we shouldn't get angry, but I'm saying when we over respond, what are we doing? We're projecting what happened on the past into the present, and it makes that relationship very, very destructive. So it's important for us to ask the question, what wounds from the past are creating pain for me today? What wounds have not healed? Because unforgiveness imprisons us. Unforgiveness has a way of locking us up. We see it in Matthew chapter 18. Peter, the apostle Peter, he kind of starts this whole conversation because look at what he asked Jesus in verse 21. He says, at that point, Peter got up the nerve to ask the master, well, how many times are we supposed to forgive? 7 times? That seems like a lot, right? I mean, they screwed up 7 times. Is that enough, Jesus? Look at what Jesus says. Master, how many times am I going to forgive my brother or sister who hurts me? How many times do I have to forgive my brother or sister who hurts me? Hurts me. 7 times, right? That's good. And Jesus is like, 7? You got to be kidding me. Try 70 times 7. In other words, Jesus says every time. And so that led to this conversation because they're kind of like, whoa, that seems radical. And so Jesus tells the story about the king and how the one who is forgiven refuses to forgive. And as a result of his unwilling to forgive, he ends up imprisoned. Unforgiveness imprisons us. Let's read it, Matthew 18. But when the man left the king, he went to a fellow servant who owed him a few $1,000s. He grabbed him by the throat and demanded instant payment. His fellow servant fell down before him and begged, no, be patient, give me a little bit of time, I'll pay, he pleaded, but the creditor wouldn't wait. He had the man arrested, put in prison until the debt could be paid in full. He had been forgiven, but he was unwilling to forgive. In other words, he's going to hold on to his unforgiveness. Well, where does it end up? The king hears about it. And so the king summoned the man. And he said, you're evil. I forgave your entire debt when you begged me for mercy. Shouldn't you be compelled to be merciful to your fellow servant who asked for mercy? The king was furious and put the screws to the man until he paid back his entire debt. Now, what do you think this dude's thinking was? But he owes me. He owes me. I didn't make up the debt. He owes me a few $1,000s. I'll be able to pay you back. Same kind of thinking you and I have, don't we, right? But he hurt me. What she did was wrong. How the company responded is not kind, right? He says to him, to the king's furious, he puts him in jail. And then he said, that's exactly what my Father in heaven is going to do to each one of us who doesn't forgive. What's that next word? Well, what? I know it's a hard one to say, isn't it? When you're thinking about forgiveness. What is it? Unconditionally. What's he going to do? Well, he says he's going to do the same thing if we don't forgive unconditionally anyone who asks for mercy. Wow. In other words, because God has forgiven us, isn't it funny? We tend to judge ourselves based on our intentions. Right? I mean, in other words, we screw up before God, right? We tell him we're going to do something, we don't do it. We know what his word says and we do what we want anyways, right? We do it, but we go to God when God forgive me and we expect him to forgive us. Why? Because, well, we know we love him. We're just human. We're just weak. We're going to get this thing figured out. We're going to do better next time. but we really do love him, right? And therefore, we feel that he ought to forgive us because we know our intentions, but we judge one another based upon actions, don't we? Well, you did it. You said it. You responded. And God's just reminding us that in the same way we are forgiven, so do we need to forgive others so we are not enslaved. Now, he was imprisoned, literally imprisoned, but that's a picture of how unforgiveness enslaves us or imprisons us. And what I mean by that is every time their name comes up, it pokes at that bruise. It hurts because of what they have done to you. You find yourself searching their name on social media in hopes that they're going through something, right? In hopes that some way they're feeling at least a little bit of the pain that they've caused you. Often it's our ex-spouses, our friends, the people that we work with, or the places in which we work, right? Or the churches that we used to attend. It's hard. Because when people intentionally hurt us, we want to hang on to it. It's important to remember that in the story, he owed the money. The dude had every right to put him in prison for a few $1,000s. He owed the money. He had not paid the money back. In other words, he hadn't asked for forgiveness until he got caught. Have you ever noticed that often when we're carrying around unforgiveness, that we put a big fence around that person? And what I mean is not only does their name cause us pain, but the idea that anybody else would cross that fence and enter into any kind of relationship with them causes us pain. We want to isolate them. We want to isolate that company. We want to isolate that ex-spouse or that friend. And we just kind of, and here's the thing though, if you put up a fence to make sure nobody is in relationship with them, guess who's got to guard it? Now you do. You got to go to Instagram to see who commented on their picture, right? You got to go to TikTok to see who's commenting. You got to keep up. You got to make sure nobody crosses that fence and enters into any kind of relationship or goes to that church or is a part of that business or whatever it is. And so who's really imprisoned? Right? Who's really enslaved?
Hey guys, before you go, I just want to remind you that God is not finished with you yet. No matter what maybe you've experienced in the past, there is a great future ahead. And if you heard something that encouraged you, why not take a moment and share it with somebody? If you haven't already, be sure and subscribe, leave a comment.